There is a story Abina's daughter asks her to tell every single night. Not sometimes, not most nights, every night without fail. From the moment the little girl's head touches the pillow. She is 7 years old now, and she has reached the age where she wants it told in order, with nothing skipped and nothing rushed, and she will stop her mother and correct her if she gets even one small piece of it wrong. She knows it better than Abina does by now. She has heard it more times than her mother has told it, which should not be possible, and yet somehow it is. It is the story of how her mother and father met. And it begins, as the little girl loves to remind everyone every single time, with tremendous seriousness, with a message. A message sent to the wrong person, at 2 o'clock in the morning, by a man Abina had never met, did not know, and had no reason on this earth to ever meet at all. If you have ever lain awake and wondered whether one small accident, one wrong turn, one mistake that should by rights have meant nothing at all could quietly reach out and change the entire shape of a life, then stay for this one, because this is the story of exactly that. Hit subscribe, get comfortable, and let me tell you how a stranger's mistake became the best thing that ever happened to a lonely young teacher in Seoul. His name is Singmin. 4 years before any of this, before the wedding and the children and the whole beautiful life they have now, he was 29 years old, and he was sitting on the floor of his small flat in Seoul at 2 in the morning with his back against the sofa, trying to send a message to his sister. It matters what kind of week he had been having because it shapes everything that comes after. His mother had been unwell, not a small unwell, the kind that fills a whole family with a quiet, cold fear that nobody quite dares to say out loud. And all that week, he was the one holding everyone together. He was the strong one, the calm one, the son who sat in the hospital corridors and translated what the doctors said into something gentler for his father to hear. The one who made all the phone calls, who kept the schedule, who told everyone else it was going to be all right in a steady, certain voice, over and over until at last they believed him. And nobody, in all of that long, frightening week, ever once thought to ask who was holding him, because he never let it show. He never let his own face fall, not once, not in front of a single living person. He simply carried it. All of it, the way that certain people do, quietly and completely, until there is nothing left inside them at all. And by the time he got home that night, there truly was nothing left. All of it had drained out of him somewhere on the long walk back from the hospital, and he came through his own front door and slid straight down on the floor and could not even make himself get up and go to bed. So he did the thing that tired people do at 2 o'clock in the morning, when the whole world is asleep and there is no one left awake to be strong for. He picked up his phone and he typed out everything that he could not say out loud to a single living soul. He typed that he was frightened, truly, deeply frightened, in a way he had not even admitted to himself yet. He typed that he did not know how to keep being the person everyone kept assuming he was, this calm and endless pillar, when inside he felt like he was made of nothing but paper. He typed that he had not cried, not once, not in all that terrible week, and that he had started to quietly worry about what that said about him, whether something in him was broken, whether he had simply gone numb. It went on and on. It was the kind of raw and total honesty a person can only ever reach at 2 o'clock in the morning, when the part of you that carefully manages what other people see has finally, mercifully fallen asleep. And when he was completely finished, when he had emptied the very last of it out onto that glowing screen, he pressed send. On one wrong digit. He was exhausted, his thumb was clumsy, one number off by a single one, and the most private thing he had ever written in his entire life went sailing off into the dark to a complete and total stranger, to a woman named Abina. And Abina was awake, because she was always awake at that hour. She had never once in her life been a good sleeper, and back then she was a teacher, 4 years deep into a life in Seoul that she had never planned on and had somehow, against every one of her own expectations, grown to truly love. She was Ghanaian, a very long way from home, from Accra, from her mother, from the heat and the noise and the food, and every single person who had ever known her as a child. She had come to Seoul for a job, and the job had ended within the first month, and she had stayed anyway out of pride and stubbornness, and built herself a small, quiet, careful life in a small, quiet, careful flat, one brick at a time, entirely alone. And that night, she was sitting up at her desk, marking a stack of papers that never seemed to grow any smaller no matter how many she finished, with one lamp on and the whole rest of the flat dark around her, when her phone suddenly lit up with a wall of text from a number she had never once seen in her life.
A stranger, pouring his whole frightened heart out to her entirely by mistake. Message after message after message of it. This raw and private confession, clearly, obviously, never meant for her eyes at all. And she could have ignored it. That is what a person is supposed to do, is it not? A wrong number in the middle of the night is not your problem to solve. You are meant to simply put the phone face down and go back to your own life and never think about it again. Any sensible woman would have done exactly that and thought nothing more of it. But she read it. And then she read it a second time, and she found that she could not put the phone down, because whoever this person was, whatever strange mistake had sent his words to her, he sounded like someone who was drowning very quietly and being terribly, heartbreakingly polite about it the whole way down. And she knew that particular feeling. She knew it from the inside. She had felt it herself in her own first lonely years in that enormous city, that specific loneliness of being strong for everyone and having no single soul to be weak in front of. So, she wrote back. She did not let herself overthink it. She simply typed, "I think you have the wrong number, but I read it, and it sounds to me like you are doing far, far better than you think you are." And then she pressed send to a total stranger. And she sat there alone, in the lamplight, and waited to see what on earth would happen next. What happened was that he apologized, not once, 11 separate times, one message after another, absolutely mortified, tripping over his own words, so sorry, so terribly embarrassed. Please ignore all of that. Please just forget he had ever sent it. He did not know what he had been thinking. And she told him to stop. She told him to stop apologizing immediately. She told him that a stranger had just trusted her with something real, whether he had meant to or not, and that she was not about to waste something that real by making it awkward for either of them. She told him that whatever he was carrying, he had clearly been carrying it entirely alone for far, far too long, and that for tonight, at the very least, he did not have to. And then she told him to drink a full glass of water and to put the phone down and to go to sleep. And he did. He would tell her much later, when they knew each other well enough for it to matter, that it was the very first time in that entire terrible week that he had fallen asleep without setting an alarm to wake himself and check on someone. That a stranger's kindness arriving entirely by accident on a wrong number at 2 o'clock in the morning had been the very first thing to let him truly rest. She did not know any of that yet, of course. She just put her own phone down and finished her marking and thought to herself, well, that was a strange and rather lovely thing, and she fully expected never to hear from him again. But the very next evening, he texted again. Just a short one this time, just to tell her that his mother's scan had come back better than anyone in the whole family had dared to hope, that she was, against all their quiet fears, going to be perfectly all right. And he would tell her afterwards that he had genuinely not planned to message her. He had picked up the phone to tell his sister, his actual sister, the one he had been trying to reach in the first place all those hours ago. But then he had stopped, because Abena was the only person in the entire world who already knew that he had been afraid. Everyone else had only ever seen him calm. She was the only one who had been let in underneath. So she was the only person he could possibly tell the good news to without having to first explain the fear all over again and reopen the whole of it and be strong about it one more time. And she wrote back then, "I am very glad indeed that it was my number." And she meant it. She meant it far more than she had any right to about a man she had never met, whose face she had never once seen, whose voice she had never even heard. She was simply, purely, entirely glad that his mother was going to be all right and that she had somehow been quietly let into the small circle of people who got to be glad about it alongside him. And that, in the end, is how the whole thing started. Not with a date, not with a photograph, not even with a single phone call. It started with a wrong number and a right kindness, and then it simply, gently, and completely refused to stop. They texted for 4 whole months before they ever once met in person. 4 entire months. And 4 months of the most wonderful nonsense. Photographs of terrible, terrible lunches. He would send her some blurry disaster he had attempted to cook and demand solemnly that she rate it out of 10. She would rate it a 2. It was never ever higher than a 2, and honestly, the 2 was pure charity on her part.
She would explain to him at truly enormous length, with actual diagrams that she drew and photographed and sent to him, exactly why the jollof rice from a certain restaurant in Itaewon was not merely bad, but was in point of fact a deep personal insult to her entire nation, and very probably to several neighboring nations as well. And he took these furious lectures with the utmost seriousness. He asked thoughtful follow-up questions. He took notes. She found out only much later that he had gone to that very restaurant alone, in secret, simply to understand what she had been so upset about, and had come home afterward and texted her one single solitary word, which was catastrophe. And then, one perfectly ordinary evening, he sent her a voice note, and her heart did something very strange when it appeared, because in all those weeks, they had never once used their voices, not one time. She pressed play, and it was not him talking at all. It was just the sound of his mother in another room, laughing helplessly at something on the television. 10 whole seconds of an old woman laughing, and underneath it, he had simply written, "This is the sound. This is the exact thing I was so afraid of losing that night. I wanted you, out of everyone in the whole world, to be the one to hear it." And she sat there alone in her kitchen and listened to a stranger's mother laughing, and understood quite suddenly and quite completely that she was already in very serious trouble. He asked her to meet him in person 11 separate times before she finally said yes. 11. Her daughter always gasps aloud at this number, as though it is a tremendous and shocking scandal, and to a 7-year-old, it truly is. And it was not because she did not want to. This part matters because the little girl always decides that it must mean her mother did not like her father, and nothing on this earth could be further from the truth. Abena liked him more than she had let herself like anyone in years. That, you see, was precisely the whole problem. It was because she had built herself such a very careful life, brick by careful brick, entirely alone, in a country that was not the one she was born in a language that was not her first language, with no family within 6,000 miles to catch her if any single part of it ever collapsed. Careful was not a personality trait. Careful was survival. Careful was the only reason she was still standing at all. And this man, this lovely, gentle, accidental man, did not feel careful in the slightest. This man felt like weather, like something that simply arrives and changes the entire sky and does not think for one moment to ask your permission first. And she was frightened of weather. She had worked so unbearably hard for her clear, calm, careful skies. So, the 12th time that he asked, he did something entirely different. He did not ask her for a date at all. He wrote, and she still has this message. She will have this message until the day she dies. He wrote, "I am not asking you to be sure. I am not asking you to promise me anything at all. I am not even asking you to call it anything. I am just asking you to come and eat rice with me. That is all. Just rice. One meal. And if it is strange, then we never ever have to do it again, and you will have lost one single evening and gained one good story." And something about him making it that small, that gentle, that impossibly easy to say yes to, he had understood without her ever once telling him exactly and precisely what she was so afraid of. And he had made the door so low and so soft and so undemanding that even a woman as careful as she was could step through it without feeling that she was risking her entire hard-won life, which of course she absolutely was. But he had let her feel as though she were only ever risking one single dinner. She said yes. Now, this is the part her daughter knows entirely by heart. This is her very favorite part of the whole story, and she mouths it along word for word, her little lips moving in the lamplight so that it has to be told in exactly the same way every single time, because heaven help anyone who dares to change even one word of it. He was already there when she arrived, a full 20 minutes early, standing outside the restaurant in the deep gold of the early evening, with a haircut that was very clearly 2 days old and just slightly too short at the sides, in the particular way of a man who has panicked about his appearance 2 days too soon and then been forced to live with the consequences. She could see him from all the way down the street. She knew that it was him before she could even make out his face. She simply knew. And when he saw her come round the corner into that gold light, he did not wave, he did not call her name, he did not smile some big, smooth, confident smile and stride across the pavement toward her. He did not do a single smooth thing, this man, not one. He just went completely, utterly still, like a man who had been quietly handed something enormous and precious and fragile and who needed a moment right there on the ordinary pavement to work out how on earth he was going to hold it without dropping it. His whole face simply opened, and she watched it happen from 30 feet away, and her careful heart, her clear, calm, careful sky, simply gave up all of its resistance on the spot, completely and forever.
People always ask her when it was that she knew, and they always expect her to say that it was the wedding or the proposal out in the rain or the first night that he told her he loved her. And it was none of those beautiful things at all. It was that one exact second, on an ordinary pavement, outside an ordinary little restaurant, in the very last of the evening light, before either of them had said one single solitary word to the other. That was the moment she knew. Everything that came after it was only ever her, slowly and happily, admitting out loud what she had already understood completely in that one silent moment. They ate rice, exactly as he had promised, and they talked, and they talked, and they talked, until the staff had quietly turned off half the lights around them, and a very patient waiter had to come over to their table twice, gently, to explain that the restaurant had in fact closed some time ago. Neither of them had noticed the room slowly emptying around them. Neither of them had noticed a single thing at all, except each other. They had been sitting there in the last lit corner of a dark and empty restaurant for well over an hour without either of them realizing it. And when they finally stepped out together into the cool of the night, Abena felt as though the entire careful architecture of her whole life had just been very gently and very permanently rearranged. After that one evening, the careful life she had built so painstakingly for herself did not so much fall apart as quietly and willingly
rearrange itself around him. And she let it, to her own absolute and enormous surprise. She simply let it happen. He learned which days she was tired before she ever told him. He would simply know it, somehow, from the shape of a single message, and on those particular days, he would ask her for nothing at all and quietly offer her everything. He started keeping the exact brand of tea that she liked in his flat, and it is an impossible tea to find anywhere in Seoul. She had mentioned it once, exactly once, in passing, months and months earlier. And then one day, there it simply was, sitting in his cupboard. And when she noticed it and turned to look at him, he only shrugged, as though tea simply appeared in cupboards of its own accord, as though he had not very clearly hunted through the entire city to find it. And he never once mentioned the trouble he had gone to. That was exactly who he was. He did enormous, tender things very quietly, and then let you find them entirely by accident. And she, in turn, learned that the quiet, frightened man from that very first message was still in there, that he still carried far, far more than he ever said out loud, that the great calm that everyone in his life leaned upon had a real and heavy cost, and that he had been paying it entirely alone for most of his life, and that he had decided, somewhere in those 4 months of terrible lunches and furious jollof diagrams, that she was the one single person in the whole world he could finally and safely put some of that weight down in front of. It is an enormous gift to become the safe place for someone who has never once in their life had one. She did not take it lightly. She never, not for one single day, took it lightly. She met his mother in person, the very one whose warm laugh she already knew entirely by heart from a 10-second voice note. The old woman took Abena's whole face in both of her small, warm hands and looked at her for a long, long moment, and then said something to her son in Korean that made him turn a deep and total red, all the way to the very tips of his ears. And she would not tell Abena what it was. For an entire year, she would not tell her. Abena only found out much later, at the wedding, from a giggling cousin, that what the old woman had said to him in that moment was, "This one has kind eyes. Do not you dare be a fool and lose her." And Abena's own mother, all the way back home in Accra, interrogated him over a single video call for 1 entire uninterrupted hour. A full hour. Abena sat beside him the whole time, utterly mortified, trying again and again to intervene, and he simply waved her away each time. He answered every single question that she put to him, patiently, seriously, one after another, about his work and his family and his intentions and his faith, and whether he could cook, and whether he would be willing to learn to make at least one Ghanaian dish properly, out of respect. And when Abena's mother had finally hung up, she called her daughter straight back, alone, and said to her only 4 words. She said, "That one is serious." And then, after a long and meaningful pause, "Keep him." He proposed to her 2 years later. Badly, gloriously, unforgettably, catastrophically badly, in a car park, in the absolutely pouring rain, and she would not trade that ridiculous, sodden, wonderful car park for the most perfect proposal ever staged by anyone, anywhere in the entire history of the world.
Because he had planned something else entirely, you see. Something at a beautiful viewpoint, high up over the whole glittering city. Something with a sunset, he confessed to her much later. Something that he had been quietly arranging and rearranging and agonizing over for weeks, fretting about every single tiny detail. And then, on the actual day, the weather simply turned. The sky went a flat, heavy, hopeless gray, and the rain came down in great sheets, and his beautiful sunset viewpoint became a wet gray nothing at all. And he stood there in that car park with his whole careful plan dissolving in the rain around him. And he found that he simply could not make himself wait even one more single hour. 2 whole years he had waited. 2 years of complete and total certainty. And he was not, he decided, going to let a bit of rain steal one more minute of it from him. The ring was in a paper bag, an actual paper bag, because in all his haste and all his nerves, he had never quite got round to buying a proper box for it. And he took it out, there in the rain, with his hands shaking, and he dropped it. Of course he dropped it. It slipped straight out of his wet fingers and rolled away under the nearest parked car. And so this single great romantic moment of both of their entire lives instantly became the two of them down on their hands and knees on the cold, wet ground of a public park car in the pouring rain, feeling around blindly under a total stranger's car for a lost ring in the dark. And by the time they finally found it again, she was laughing so hard that she genuinely could not speak. Tears streaming down her face, rain streaming down her face, completely and utterly gone. And he was still down there on one knee in an actual puddle, soaked right through to the skin, holding up this poor muddy little ring, and he looked up at her and he said, "Please, please, I have been carrying this thing around in my pocket for 6 entire weeks now, waiting and waiting for the perfect moment that is clearly, obviously never ever going to come. Please, Abena, I am begging you, just say something." And she got out exactly one word. It was not an elegant word. It was not a word from anyone's romantic dream, not from a single film, not from a single poem. It was just yes. Soaking wet and laughing and crying and kneeling on the wet ground of a public park car right beside a stranger's car. Yes, yes, of course yes, 1,000 times over yes. Now please get up off the ground, you ridiculous, wonderful man. Yes. They married the following spring. 2 ceremonies because both of their mothers absolutely and immovably insisted upon it. And because by that point, the 2 mothers had somehow become a single unstoppable force of nature, an alliance that shared not one word of any common language and yet communicated entirely and beautifully through food and firm, meaningful hand gestures. They planned the entire thing between the 2 of them. The bride and groom were barely consulted at all. It was frankly a great deal safer that way for everyone involved. There was kente cloth and there was hanbok. Abena wore both on 2 different glorious days, and she has said since that she has never in her whole life felt more beautiful or more completely and utterly exhausted. 2 weddings is not twice the joy. It is roughly 10 times the joy and about 20 times the work. And she has said she would do every single minute of it all over again tomorrow without one moment of hesitation. There was a Korean uncle, one of Sengmin's, who attempted a zonto out on the dance floor at the Ghanaian ceremony. He had very clearly been practicing in secret for weeks. He was not good. He was, in fact, magnificent. And he was cheered so loudly and so lovingly by both sides of the entire family that he simply could not make himself stop long past the point where his poor body was very clearly begging him to. Until at last, 2 kind cousins had to gently take him by the elbows and guide him back to a chair, where he sat triumphant and gasping and beaming, a genuine hero of 2 nations at once. And there was Abena's father, who had flown all the way from Accra for this, and who had been quietly, deeply terrified of the entire thing, of the strangeness of it, of the great distance, of a beloved daughter marrying into a world that he did not know at all. And on that first evening, he got seated knee to knee with Sengmin's father, 2 older men, 2 proud fathers, who did not share one single solitary word of any common language between the 2 of them. And nobody saw either of them for the entire rest of the night. Because by the end of it, the 2 of them were completely inseparable. They had found themselves a quiet corner and a bottle of something strong, and they were getting slowly and happily and thoroughly drunk together and roaring with helpless laughter at jokes that neither of them could possibly have understood a single word of. communicating entirely through raised glasses and slapped shoulders and the deep and ancient wordless language of two fathers who have each just given away a beloved child and found to their own enormous relief a true friend in the only other man in that room who understood exactly and precisely how that felt. Abina's mother cried through the entire whole of the first ceremony, every single second of it. And then, the very moment it ended, she went right round the entire room and apologized to every single guest individually for having cried, which of course only ever succeeded in making every single one of them start crying too, so that by the end of it, fully half the room was weeping and apologizing and laughing all at once, which is, many agree, the very truest possible measure of a wedding well and properly done. And Sung Min's mother, the very one who had been so gravely ill 4 years before, the one whose frightening scan, whose terrible brush with the very West had been the entire reason her frightened son had sat alone on his floor at 2 o'clock in the morning and sent that message to the wrong number in the first place. She danced. That woman danced all night long, and every so often, right across that crowded, happy, golden room, she would be caught watching her son, watching him laugh, watching him take his new wife's hand, with an expression on her face that needed no translation in any language on this earth. She had lived, she had stayed, and because she had stayed, and because her son had loved her so much and been so afraid of losing her, all of this, every single beautiful bit of it now existed. She knew that, and once, just once that whole night, her eyes met Abina's all the way across that room, and she pressed her hand flat against her own heart, and Abina's pressed hers flat against her own, and that was all. And that was absolutely everything. Their daughter came along 18 months later, at 4 o'clock in the morning, absolutely furious about the entire situation, screaming out her total outrage before she was even fully into the world. And she has not fundamentally changed at all. She is still furious about a great many things at 4 o'clock in the morning to this very day. She comes by it all extremely honestly. They gave her 2 names, one from each side, because they simply could not agree on one, and then they slowly realized somewhere around the third increasingly silly argument that they did not actually have to agree at all. She could simply have both of them. She could simply be both of them, a Ghanaian name and a Korean name, sitting proudly side by side on one single birth certificate, belonging entirely and completely to one small, furious, perfect little person. That was, when they finally understood it, the entire point of her. She would never once have to choose. She got to be all of it, all at once, forever. He did not put her down for the first 6 hours of her entire life, not once. The nurses kept coming in and gently reminding him that he was in fact allowed to sit down, that he was allowed to rest, that this was not going anywhere at all, that this was a marathon and not a sprint. He heard absolutely none of it. He simply stood there by the window in the pale early light, this man who had spent his whole entire life holding everyone else together, holding his brand new daughter against his chest. And Abina has said she has never, in all her life, seen a single person look so completely and utterly undone by love. Those first weeks at home were a complete blur of no sleep at all, and an enormous, terrifying, total kind of love that Abina had genuinely had no idea even existed until the very moment it arrived. And she would find him at 3 o'clock in the morning, just standing quietly over the little cot, watching the baby breathe, in the very same way she realized one night with a jolt that he had once lain awake watching over everyone else, over his mother, over his whole family, back when all the watching came purely from fear. Except that this was not fear at all. This time, standing over his sleeping daughter in the dark, he was not afraid of a single thing in the world. This time, he was simply, quietly, completely amazed. And she stood there in the doorway and watched him watching her and thought to herself, there it is. There is the whole of it. Everything that one wrong number ever gave to them.
all of it, standing together in one dark room at 3 o'clock in the morning. Their little boy came along 3 years after that, and he, in the grand and noble tradition of second children absolutely everywhere, arrived so blindingly fast that his own father missed the entire thing by 9 full minutes. 9 whole minutes, stuck in traffic, on the phone, shouting at the taxi driver and shouting at the universe itself, and finally arriving to find his son already born and swaddled and entirely unbothered by his father's dramatic absence. And he has never once, not one single solitary time, been allowed to forget those 9 minutes. Their daughter, who was only 3 years old at the very time and remembers absolutely none of it, brings the whole thing up at least once a month with tremendous authority and conviction. She was there, she insists firmly, in spirit. She saw the entire thing with her own eyes, and in her expert and completely invented professional opinion, her father simply should have run. He should have abandoned the taxi entirely and run through the streets of Seoul on foot. She is extremely firm on this particular point. And so, here they all are, 7 whole years on now from that one wrong number. 2 children, 2 names each, 1 impossible T, and 2 mothers who between the pair of them run most of both entire families. And a life that Abina could never in 1,000 years have planned for herself and would not now trade for any planned life on this whole earth. And every single night, her daughter asks her for the same story. And every single night she tells it. And every single night when she reaches the very, very end of it, the little girl asks her the exact same question. She looks up at her mother from her pillow with her father's own exact eyes, and she asks, "And you kept the message?" And every single night, Abina takes out her phone, and she scrolls back, and back, past 7 whole years of grocery lists and blurry photographs, and "Are you home yet?" and "I love you," and "Please buy milk on the way," and "I am so proud of you," and "We need nappies again." Past every bit of it, all the way down to the very, very bottom of everything, to a wall of text from a total stranger sent at 2 o'clock in the morning. 4 whole years before that very child, the one now asking the question, was even a thought or a hope or a distant possibility in the world. The very first words her father ever sent, and meant, of course, for somebody else entirely. She has never deleted it, and she never ever will. When she's a very old woman, it will still be there, sitting right at the bottom of everything, underneath a whole entire lifetime of them. The very first brick of the entire, beautiful, accidental life that she did not plan and would not now trade for anything at all that was ever carefully planned by anybody. And then her daughter says, "Read the last bit." She always says it exactly like that every single night. So Abina reads it to her. "I think you have the wrong number, but I read it, and it sounds to me like you are doing far, far better than you think you are." And from the doorway, where he has been standing and quietly listening every single night for years and years now, without either of them ever once mentioning out loud that they both know perfectly well that he is there, her husband says the very thing that he always says. He says, very quietly, in the way that he says it every single night, "Best mistake I ever made." And she says back to him, in the way that she says it every single night, "It was 1 digit." And he smiles, the exact same smile from that pavement 7 whole years ago, the one that undid her entire careful heart in 1 single second. And he says, so softly it can barely be heard, "It was 1 digit." So, if you are still awake out there tonight, if you are lying there right now, quietly wondering whether the careful, sensible, quiet life you have built for yourself has any more surprises left hidden away in it anywhere at all, If you have quietly given up on the one single thing you once hoped for most in all the world and told yourself that it was simply too late now and that those sorts of things just do not happen to people like you, then hear this. It is not too late, and it happens to people exactly, precisely like you. Has arrived on a wrong number at 2 o'clock in the morning from an exhausted, frightened stranger who was only ever trying to text his own sister. You genuinely never ever know which small accident, which wrong turn, which tiny and completely harmless little mistake is the one that is quietly about to reach out and change the entire shape of your whole life. So, tell me down there in the comments, what is the very smallest accident that ever changed your whole entire life? A wrong number, a missed train, a spilled coffee, a door held open for a stranger? Tell me all about it. Every single one of them gets read, and they are honestly the very best part of these stories. And if this story warmed your heart tonight, even a little bit, then please subscribe and stay close by because there are so very, very many more of these to tell. Sleep well tonight, wherever in the world you are, and please keep your heart just a little more open than you think is entirely wise, because you truly never know. You never ever know who out there has your number, even by mistake, especially sometimes by mistake.